Well, as always, we like our interviewees to introduce themselves. So if you please would start doing so.
Oh, I'm Missy Summers with the PR agency for Microsoft, but this is Scott Woodgate, Windows Azure Developer Marketing.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Okay, and what's exactly your daily work in Redmond?
Sure. So I work in Redmond and I run the marketing team that works with the product team in bringing workloads to market on Windows Azure that target developers. So things like development and test, websites and mobile services, and then also do a lot of conferences and messaging to developers on how to take advantage of Windows Azure as part of their jobs.
Uh-huh. Well, like I was mentioning to you before the recording, there are two types of readers for media, right? Mm-hmm. One is on the strategic side. Should I adapt it? Why should I do it? Mm-hmm. Is it as expensive as they say? Well, I guess you've got the proper answer for that.
Sure. So I would say on the strategic side, thinking of a development leader.
And I'm including, small companies also. Right?
Okay, sure.
Because here there are a bunch of small companies which wonder why should they move to the cloud. Let's call it Windows Azure or anywhere.
Sure. And I would say for the smallest companies, they typically want pre-built software, and so they will look for software as a service applications that are already built from ISVs or from ourselves like Office 365. Mm-hmm. For slightly bigger companies who want to do some custom development, that's really where Windows Azure can help. And for that set of customers, it may be time to market that they're looking for as an advantage, because with the cloud, you don't have to wait for a server to arrive. You don't have to wait for IT to configure things. You get instantly, in 7 seconds, a server ready to go build. So you can build solutions much quicker with the cloud. And then secondly, the other key thing with the cloud is the cost aspect, where you pay for what you use as opposed to having a large capital cost up front. So if you're a small company, you pay for what that entails. As you grow to a bigger company, you pay for what that entails. Mm-hmm. Which can be a big advantage for smaller companies with aspirations to grow bigger. But yeah, time to market and cost are two of the bigger reasons to choose cloud in general. And then the reasons to choose Microsoft within that are typically because we understand what you already have on-premise. You probably have some Microsoft server infrastructure on-premise. Mm-hmm. And we have taken much of the same technologies and made those available in cloud. And so they're very familiar. You use the same tooling, such as Visual Studio, to talk to on-premises as well as the cloud. You have the same management experience through System Center. And so it's very easy to transition. And also we recognize that most bigger customers will have both on-premise data centers and the cloud. They'll have both. We call it hybrid. And we do a lot to support that hybrid scenario as opposed to only public cloud or only on-premise.
Okay. But does it imply that any small medium company which moves to the cloud is going to get a return of investment in a clear amount of time, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean,
short term.
Like anything, it's a project-based decision on what you're trying to build. But as an example, if you're building a digital marketing website to attract a lot of customers, then the cost of doing that on a cloud platform is very low, and you don't get into the scenario that some customers get into today, where you made a small investment, you suddenly have a lot of customers coming and hitting that website, and that website goes down. You can very quickly, with a dial, increase the scale of your website in the cloud so that when your marketing campaign takes off, you don't have any outages.
We've seen this morning in the keynote the announcement of per minute invoicing instead of the per hour and so on. Mm-hmm. I think that can be something to animate potential users, right?
Yeah, per minute is a big deal. And I would say the economics of cloud are highly in favor of the customer. with 2 or 3 large vendors competing against each other. We continue to collectively drop prices and come up with further innovations to put money back into customers' hands. The cost of storage has gone down dramatically in the last year, as an example. When we buy as Microsoft servers, we can just buy them at a more economical rate than customers because we're buying them in 5,000 at a time. And so the economics are absolutely to the advantage of the customer, both because of the scale and because of the competition in the space.
That's true. Okay, that's maybe one side, right? Let's imagine that the one who takes decisions in the company is already convinced, and he wants to move to the cloud, so he has to talk to his team, and under the point of view of developers, I mean, program manager and just plain developers, which are the big challenges, which are the big opportunities?
Sure.
So 2 sides of the coin.
Sure. So I would say and I'll answer it slightly differently, but I understand your question. From a developer perspective, the biggest challenge for a developer is finding time to write code. Developers want to write code, and anything that gets in the road of writing code is kind of getting in the road of me getting my job done. And so one of the big advantages that the cloud has is that you don't have to think hard about what hardware you need to purchase before you start a project, when you really don't know how much you need, and because you're going to go order that and it's going to arrive weeks later, or how many virtual machines you need on a test box that you have limited test hardware that you need to reuse on a regular basis. So one of the big advantages of the cloud for a developer is as they develop and test, they can take advantage of the cloud to very, very quickly provision infrastructure. And so in doing that, you can focus as a developer on the coding because it took you 13 seconds to get a SQL server. Imagine that, 13 seconds for a SQL server, or 7 seconds for a website, or 7 minutes for a Windows server. And so this notion of being very, very quickly able to deploy your software enables you to spend most of your time writing code, which is a big deal for the developer.
Yeah, all right. But on the other point of view, I mean, the developer is going to be able to use the same, let's say, tooling, the same languages, the same structures that he's used to, or does he have to accustom to something special, let's say asynchronous?
Good question.
Programming.
So I would say in the simplest scenarios, the simplest scenario is I want to accelerate my on-premise development by building something in the cloud. And actually we announced as part of this MSDN offer, if you've got MSDN, you get basically six servers in the cloud at the $100 level. You don't need to learn anything. No, you don't need to learn any new coding things in that scenario. You do need to know how to create a new virtual machine, which is very simple in Azure. If what you're looking to build is a scaled out architecture, and so you're an ISV or you're looking to build out a scaled out architecture, then depending on what solution you're building, you may need to learn new things. If you're building a web scenario, you don't need to learn a lot. You take your ASP.NET website, you hook up a publish string, you push it to Azure, and you use a dial, and we do the scaling.
Mostly so the profile that I'm thinking about is a web profile.
Yeah, so if you're a web developer using Windows Azure websites, you can literally take your standard ASP.NET website and by right-clicking on that website, choosing Publish, choosing your Windows Azure subscription, push that website up to Windows Azure, and in most cases it will run unchanged. The advantage is you'll be able to scale it on that infrastructure very quickly. And beyond websites, if you're doing custom multi-tier development and you want to write new cloud applications at great scale, then yes, in those types of scenarios, there is new architectures to learn, new patterns to learn, because most developers are not scaling out their applications today, they're scaling them up. And as you pointed out, there's more asynchronous in those architectures. So there's multiple tiers. For dev test, there's very little to learn. For websites, there's very, very little to learn. For new cloud-based applications that scale out in the cloud, yes, there is some learning. And you can use the language of choice. And certainly if you're a .NET developer using Visual Studio, you're well served.
even so, when you mean, I mean, the language of your choice, are you including the new standards? Let's say to use JavaScript frameworks like Node.js, Knockout, or one of those.
Correct.
In the cloud.
Yes.
Would I get more or less the same experience in timing and response and all that?
Yes, so we support Node, PHP, Ruby support's coming along, and actually we just made a very significant announcement with Oracle, where we will support, Oracle will support and we will support.
Yeah, we saw this morning, Brad said something about it.
Exactly, and so that's a big deal for Java developers or folks using Oracle databases, is now Oracle will support you when you run your Oracle database in a virtual machine. So our approach with Windows Azure is not a Microsoft-only approach. Our approach embraces open source from a language perspective. It embraces Linux from an operating system perspective, because our customers in the enterprise expect us to extend their data center. And whatever's in their data center, they expect we should be able to run in the cloud. And so it is important for us to fulfill our customers' desires. And at the end of the day, we're driving storage, compute, and network usage.
That's another question that I was going to make you. I've seen in the sponsors area, I've seen a Red Hat booth, which is quite funny in a Microsoft event. Not so much, according to what you say, but
Sure.
Do you think that fits into that experience that you're?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would
proposing?
say any computing workload that has a number of people using it, we would like to figure out how to get to Windows Azure. And so, of course, we're spending time with our faithful audience on .NET and Visual Studio and moving that forward. But every other computing workload that isn't that we can run on Windows Azure at scale is something we're interested in doing, because customers are not looking for a data center for their Microsoft stuff and a data center for their Java stuff and a data center for their Node stuff in the public cloud.
Right.
They're looking for a data center in their public cloud that can do all of those things.
Yes. Okay, well, maybe just to finish this, there is another aspect that many people cares about, and it's the learning curve. Right? I mean, okay, maybe I'm convinced, I'm sure about it, but learning curve takes time and money, so that's something to ponderate, right?
Sure.
What can you say?
So I would
that?
say one of the biggest advantages of Windows Azure as opposed to other clouds, particularly for developers that are used to Visual Studio and Microsoft technologies, is the learning curve is incredibly short. If you know how to use Hyper-V and you know how to use VMs, then all you really need to know is how to create a new VM on Windows Azure or how to transfer it to Windows Azure. And then from then on, you're using remote desktop, you're using all of the things you would normally use. So for the virtual machine scenario, the learning curve is really short. If you're using websites, it's, I described earlier, very, very short. And if you're building a new cloud application, yes, there is some learning curve there, which is less about learning language and more about learning how to architect scale out in the cloud. But it is a big advantage and differentiator for Microsoft that our customer base is already using lots of things like Visual Studio, and we have familiar experiences in Visual Studio. For example, in the Server Explorer, I can view databases in the cloud, or I can view databases on-premise, and from a developer's perspective, they can't even tell the difference when they're using it. It just feels the same.
Yeah,
and
you
acts
have
the
a
same.
connection string, and that's
Then
it.
you go, off you go.
Yeah.
So we do a lot to make it very familiar, so that once a developer gets an understanding that they can create infrastructure, something they would have asked an IT person to do beforehand, once you get the understanding you can create infrastructure, then the rest of that experience is very seamless and quite simple to learn.
Okay. Well, that's all from my side. Thanks a lot for your words, and I'll let you know as soon as this is publishable.
Sure.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Cheers.